Chapter 7 Russia Erased. Anastasia's grandfather and I rode along in silence. As we approached Suzdal and could see its buildings in the distance, I said to him, "Look, there's Suzdal. It's a city around 1,000 years old, part of the Vladimir Suzdal Principality. In fact, it was one of the religious capitals of that period." "Why are you going there, Vladimir?" "I want to pay another visit to the museum and take a look at the ancient sites, so as I can get a picture of how people lived over the past millennium." "Try to get a picture before going into the city. Everything that lies around it is worth immeasurably greater attention than the city itself." "All around are just fields," I protested, "with the occasional dilapidated village here and there. No information to help with the picture." "Vladimir, stop the car. We shouldn't be talking while driving." "Don't be afraid, I'm a good driver." "I'm not afraid, I know, and so I'd better be quiet." I pulled over to the side of the road and stopped the car. After a few moments, I realized that I couldn't really drive and have this conversation at the same time. The difficulty was that, just like Anastasia, her grandfather sometimes spoke with certain special intonations, so powerful that the listener could perceive visible images, almost like holograms in space. This kind of speech allowed the possibility of showing scenes of the past or future, or even on another planet, as Anastasia once did. It's hard to tell just what is behind this phenomenon. Possibly hypnosis, possibly some kind of mysterious abilities enjoyed by people of the priestly class, or maybe it was something possessed by everybody living on Earth back in ancient times. A talented actor on stage can also create all sorts of pictures and images for an audience with the help of intonations and his own emotions, albeit not as vivid and detailed as those of Anastasia's. Still, it is actors above all others who confirm, through their mastery, the existence of such possibilities in man. It turns out that people of long ago didn't need television, with its huge network of personnel and technology, including satellites even. It turns out that in losing his natural, God-given abilities, man replaces them with awkward, artificial substitutes which are far less perfect. And he even boasts about it, calling his inventions a significant achievement. The saddest part is that mankind today is losing its capacity for logical thinking. This is more than just a sad state of affairs. It is a most frightful epidemic, capable of transforming modern humanity into a bunch of mad rodents, devouring one another and destroying their own living environment. Suicide rodents. What Anastasia's grandfather was to tell me in the field needs to be understood. It gives rise to the following conclusion. In losing the ability to think logically, the people of the earth no longer are able to see and understand the unenviable situation they are being pushed into. Judge for yourselves. I had stopped the jeep at the side of the road. The gray-haired oldster got out and headed into a field. I followed along behind. Before long, he stopped and bowed to the ground, saying, "Health to your thoughts and aspirations, dear people." He uttered this greeting most sincerely and with a tone that it seemed as though there really were people standing there in front of him. Then something happened that I can't put a name to, at least not for now. At first there was some sort of stirring in the air, and a barely noticeable mist arose from the earth. It seemed to be congealing, and soon afterward I could clearly see the outlines of some kind of human figure becoming increasingly distinct. And finally, there, standing before us, was an elderly man with a powerful physique. A headband encircled his light brown hair. He had a calm expression on his face, with just a trace of despondency. Behind him, in the distance, I could see gardens, copses, and beautiful wooden mansions. It looked as though the barren fields of a moment ago were now populated with a whole lot of families. The man standing before us was speaking in inaudible tones to the Siberian elder. The vision lasted for several minutes, then it slowly began to dissipate, as though being erased by an invisible hand. What was being erased was the genuine ruse, not a ruse someone had simply thought up. The vision disappeared altogether when Anastasia's grandfather turned in the direction of Suzdal. He stood there silently staring toward the city, then turned to me and asked, "What, do you think, Vladimir, was the original purpose of the city we see in the distance?" "What's thinking got to do with it? Everybody knows this from their history. Suzdal was where the clergy was cloistered. The first Christian bishops lived there. The monasteries and the Kremlin, where the elite lived, are still preserved today. That's a historical fact." "Yes, you're right, historical. But all Russia's ancient cities have two histories. The original history is more significant. I guess we'll never be able to rediscover the original history." "We shall know, Vladimir. You will figure it out through your own logic and will even be able to see it. But start by determining the reason these cities sprang up, along with their original purpose." "I would say their purpose lies in the fact that they made it easier to live together and defend themselves against enemy invasions. For example, apart from the clergy and the elite, Suzdal was a home to many craftsmen. They produced equestrian harnesses, carts, sleighs, earthenware pots, plows, and harrows. They would sell these items and live off the proceeds." "Who did they sell them to?" "To the peasants, of course," I responded. "That's it," the old fellow confirmed. "They sold or bartered their handicrafts for produce, and the produce came into the city from all the many outlying domains." "Yes, of course." "But which do you think came first? Which was primary in this place, the domains or the city?" "The domains, I would say. The builders and the craftsmen would want to eat every day. If they started to build things in the open fields, there would have been nowhere to get their food from." "Correct. So we've come to the conclusion that a little more than 1,000 years ago the fields around this city were the site of marvelous, rich domains. And the place where the city of Suzdal sits now was the site of their capiche." "What is a capiche?" "It's a place where people gathered together from all around for fairs to exchange goods and procure household effects. They shared experiences with each other. They put on massive celebrations with singing and dancing, and some of which were designed to help people find their soulmates. This was also the place the elders of the families gathered for a viece and adopted unwritten rules for living. They could censor a wrongdoer for his crime, although such instances were rare. Their censor was even a more fearful sentence than physical punishment." "And who was in charge of this whole land?" "A hired hand. I really can't think of an alternative term. A hired hand was the administrator of the capiche, but he wasn't really in charge. Rather, he carried out the decisions taken by the elders. For example, when they desired to put on a new tethering post or a new road or build a big barn, it transpired that people from each domain would be assigned to carry out that decision. Sometimes the hired hand would be required to find the other hired workers like himself. It was also his job to keep the whole capiche clean and neat. Let's say they had a fair, and after it was over, people dispersed to their homes. Then the tethering posts might have had to be fixed and the horse droppings cleaned up all over the place. This task would be carried out by the hired hand and his assistants. If he performed his work carelessly, the elders would sack him from his job, and then either the hired hand would go and look for work at another capiche, or he would stay where he was, but be demoted to a hired hand's assistant. It was difficult for the elders to maintain hired help, as just about everyone wanted to live in their own domains. Thus, it might happen that hired hands for capiches could be acquired from foreign lands. The Vedras social order of Rus before the princes rose to power lasted for many thousands of years. It was superior to all the state social orders we know today, and it extended to all the continents of the earth. When the earth was overcome by corruption, Egypt and Rome fell into slavery. But the Vedras social order in Rus lasted 5,500 years. But why did the Vedras social order give way to corruption too? Which are you most interested in? Rome, ancient Egypt, or Rus? Pretty much the same thing happened in all three. If they're pretty much the same, then let's go for Rus. I already know that it was subject to external invaders, resulting in the destruction of the traditions and cultures of the great Vedras civilization. There were invasions, but there's much more to it than that. The Vedras social order underwent its first changes in other lands. Back when there was no foe to invade, there were no armies. There were no wars or military campaigns, because there was nothing that could lead to them. The whole earth at the time was made up of marvelous domains. People's culture and concepts were truly outstanding. Everybody knew that to take vegetables or fruit out of someone else's orchard by force or stealth was not only improper, it was useless and dangerous to oneself. Only through produce that was given freely and with desire could benefit be acquired. Neither was it considered proper to take household animals from someone else's domain by deceit or by force. A cow would not have let a stranger come close, and somebody else's dog might have shown itself to not be a friend, but a foe, and a horse might have taken the occasion to throw a rider if it were not its own. With concepts like these, who would dare invade? Such concepts made invasions absurd. Corruption, in the main, came from ignorance, or rather from treason or betrayal. Even in little things of the culture of one's forebears, their way of life. The family chain leads us to God. To betray one's forebears' meaning of life is tantamount to killing God within oneself. Yes, in Rus, of course, the people were deceived. Through the priests' well-owned manipulative techniques which are still active in our own time. Back then, the elders overlooked this subtle play, and their mistake is still being paid for by subsequent generations even today. Chapter 8. The Elders' Mistake. From hired hand to a prince. At the beginning of the present era, many countries were already ruled by emperors, pharaohs, or czars. The form of government under which a large state is controlled by one man is unnatural. It has never brought and will never bring a good, happy life to a single nation on the face of the earth. This form of government benefits the priests, who manipulate countries through their rulers. It is difficult, after all, to negotiate with all the people at once, a lot easier to deal with just a single individual. Only in Rus they did not succeed in setting up a single ruler. Everyone there was guided by the tribal elders' council. These councils were not something that could be corrupted or forced under threat into a decision that would lead to the oppression of the people. Who would make such an obscene decision for one's children? Several times, through various subterfuges in different places, the priest's assistants attempted to set up a princely authority, a single ruler over the people. In this particular area, for example, events unfolded as follows. One day, a stranger from afar arrived at the Vedras capiches situated where Suzdal is now. Like the wise men, itinerant minstrels and craftsmen, he was offered food and lodging. The stranger stayed 2 weeks but did not engage in any useful activity. The hired hand in charge questioned him. "What useful contribution, stranger, can you make to our capiche?" And the stranger replied, "None at all. But to you personally, I can render an invaluable service. I have heard rumors that the elders are not happy with you. In a year, maybe even half a year, you will be let go. If you take my advice, on the other hand, the elders will be crawling on their knees before you. You can have your pick of girls from any domain to wife, whereas right now there's not a single one that would live with you. I can make it so that it will be your decisions and not those of the tribal elders that will be carried out." The hired hand in charge of the capiche and part-time janitor agreed. He listened to the stranger, an agent of the priests, and the stranger proposed, "When people gather for a fair at the capiche from all around and stay until the following morning, during the night, you will cut your face with a knife and leave the capiche along with your trustworthy assistants so that you can return in the evening with broken-winded horses. During the night, I and my assistants, they are already here in guise of artists and craftsmen, will take the horses away from their tethering posts, and you will bring them back in the evening, saying you recaptured them from the miscreants. In your wounded state, you will ask the elders for an armed garrison for their own protection. They will agree. You will take my companions into your garrison. They will all meekly obey your command." The hired hand agreed to the criminal act. He did everything according to the stranger's proposal. When the wounded man returned toward evening with the herd of stolen horses, he learnt that not only had the stranger's henchmen stolen the horses, they had also killed 3 people and burnt the smithy and a barn. The wounded hired hand appeared before the elders. He told how he and his assistants had given chase to the miscreants, but they were outnumbered, and his assistants were beaten back. And when he began asking the elders for the resources to maintain a strong armed garrison, he asked them to grant him the authority to take decisions on his own in the interests of general security. The elders were taken aback at the hideous crime and agreed to maintain the garrison, only they were unwilling to pull their own sons away from the domains. So it was decided to bring in strangers to form a garrison, and allot them a tribute from each domain. Other capiches followed their lead, and also began to create their own armed garrisons. Indeed, since they now had power, the hired hands began transforming themselves into princes. They started waging war against each other, justifying this to the elders as a necessary preventative first strike. The princes supposed they had achieved considerable authority. In fact, for centuries now, they have been strictly following the priest's advice, even without realizing it. Such a system of authority came together all by itself. The hired hand remained a hired hand. He merely exchanged the masters. The new master was exceptionally cruel to his hired hands. For thousands of years, the priest's hired hands kept killing each other, conspiring and hatching their schemes, aspiring more and more lustily for power. You surely know yourself from history how many deaths the path to princely power is strewn with. They even resorted to slaying their fathers and brethren. Pretty much the same thing came about in various countries, and little has changed even today. Thus, the time of the princes had its start in Russia, too, just as it had in other lands long before. You know the rest of the story, I dare say, and the armed garrisons are still around today, still serving somebody's interests. The armaments and weaponry may have changed, but the essence is still the same, and the crimes have not abated. They keep multiplying and keep getting more and more sophisticated. The elders made a mistake. It is a mistake which, if you form your own political party, you will not want to make again. A mistake not to be repeated. What precisely was the elders' mistake, I asked. Was it in forming the garrisons with foreign mercenaries? But the way things have turned out now, a state can no longer survive without militia or an army. The garrisons here, Vladimir, are not the underlying cause. It goes a lot deeper into the psychological. I don't know how to put it more clearly. It has to do with forgetting the precepts of our ancestors, God's precepts. Think about it. God gave each and everyone equal authority. Consequently, the only social structure that can claim perfection is one where there is no centralized authority, where every individual is endowed with equal power. When you give somebody your vote, you are not bestowing authority on anyone. By voting for someone, you are simply placing them in subjection to the existing system and voluntarily relinquishing the authority God has given you. And over the centuries, most people's minds have been perverted. It is the job of the ruler and the government to deal with all important questions for us, they think. These people's thoughts don't even touch the question of the order of life. So, that means there's no longer any point in voting at all. We'll never establish a party that way. By law, we have to vote. Well, if you have to, then vote to make sure no one individual is able to control people's lives. If you're talking about the Vichy gatherings they had in the Vedic Rus, I said, that's totally impossible today. People can't keep constantly coming together from different parts of the country. Besides, there's no way a party like that can ever get registered. Why do they need to come together? Just turn all the modern inventions at your disposal to a good purpose. Use any kind of communications link, the computer, for example. As for registration, isn't that a bit ridiculous for a party of the majority of the people? You ought to be registrars yourselves. Anyway, securing some kind of registration isn't the main point at issue. The main thing is to allow the setting up of any centralized authority. Anybody working in the central apparatus, if it is absolutely necessary according to your law, should be strictly hired staff with no access to financial control. Besides, money should never be concentrated in one place. But the law requires all parties to elect a central committee, I observed. So elect all party members to it, or at least every 10th person in the party. There's something else to think about here. I got really angry at first when you said the party's main goal was the restoration of love to families. I thought you were making fun of me, that you were trying to make me into a laughingstock. I remember. But now I've given quite a bit of thought to this question and have come to the conclusion that it really is not just one of the main goals, but the main goal, and that the question of finding one's soulmate requires specific conditions to be set up, special events to be organized, the rites of ancient Rus should be made public, and we need to get not only science but culture and ideological propaganda involved in working out these questions. They need to be resolved on the state level. The degree of civilization of any given state needs to be judged on the basis of the number of happy, loving families living therein. Congratulations. On what? On understanding that. Congratulations are still premature. I can't for the life of me think of a way to formulate this goal without people laughing at its constitution, or at me, or at our future party. So let them laugh. What do you mean, let them? If people start laughing, then I'll be the only member of a party with a constitution like that. It will end up being an unregistered party with a laughable constitution supported by a single individual and an ordinary member of that party at that. Why just a single individual? There will be at least two. I shall be supporting it as well. And the two of us will raise some money and hire ourselves an executive secretary. You serious? What, you're going to join the party too? No, I shan't be joining it. Anyway, as you point out, I can't be registered under your law, but I'll be supporting the Motherland Party with my whole heart from right there in the taiga. And if you're concerned about there just being two of us, remember that all the great causes have always begun not with a mass of people, but with just a single individual. Years down the road, humanity will indeed laugh, but not at you. They'll be laughing at themselves, and they will be happy. Okay, I will try. I'll give some more thought to drafting the Constitution, and I'll ask my readers to think about it too. If I were you, Vladimir, I would ask Anastasia to tell more about the wedding rite. In the Vedras culture, after all, it began right at birth. How on earth could a wedding rite begin at a man's birth? Vedras people considered the primary birth to be not the appearance of the body, but the illumination of love. Nobody in today's world can illustrate this the way Anastasia can. Ask her to recreate a picture of life in a Vedras family. I shan't say where or how this meeting with Anastasia took place. I'll start right away to set forth her description of one Vedras family's attitude toward love. Whoever manages to make sense of it and feel the significance contained in the culture of their love may also be able, perhaps, to figure out the great wisdom and cosmic dimensions of the Vedras rites. Chapter 9. The Creator's Greatest Gift, Childhood Love. It was with childlike joy and inspiration that Anastasia began telling me about the Vedras rite associated with the energy of love. The activities of the Vedras people amounted to a continuous learning cycle. It was a great and joyous school of conscious being. All Vedras celebrations could be described as tests of mind and skill. They all involved, one might say, reminders to the adults as well as wise lessons to the young. But even during the days of intense harvest gatherings, the Vedras people worked with a joyous heart. Their work was imbued with meaning, and that went beyond material creations. Look, Vladimir, see, it is hay-cutting time, a magnificent, clear day. The whole settlement, from the littlest ones to the greatest, is heading out to the meadows with the first rays of the sun. See, there go 2 drays carrying a whole family. Only the elder family members have stayed behind to keep the household animals company. But the guys, the young lads, are riding horseback, with only collar bands on the steeds and long lengths of rope in their hands. On these horses, they will use the long ropes to cope with the task of dragging the stooks of hay over to the main stacks. The stately muzhiks in the carts hold their scythes poised, blades up, while their wives and older children sit beside them with their rakes, ready to start raking up the hay the men will be cutting. Also riding on the drays are some very small children. What for? Just for the fun of it, out of curiosity, to mingle, frolic, and play, and to observe the grown-ups on this day. The people are by no means dressed in rags. See their clean white shirts, and the women wearing flowers entwined in their braids and embroidered dresses. Why are they dressed up in their best, as if going to a celebration? The answer, Vladimir, is that they are under no constraint to actually cut hay. They all have their own piles of hay back in their respective domains, though naturally it does not hurt to have some community stacks in reserve. The main thing, however, the tacit purpose behind all the general activity, is to show themselves at work in their neighbors' eyes, to steal furtive glances at each other, and give a chance to the young guys and girls to get to know each other in a common activity. That is why the young people, even from outlying communities, are so happy to turn out for the haymaking. Now it has begun. Look, the scythemen are moving forward steadily, all in a row. Not one of them must fall behind. Their wives are raking up yesterday's cuttings to be dried, singing as they work. The young people gather the dried hay into stooks. Those slightly older will build the haystack. See those 2 guys standing on top of the haystack? One of them is 18, the other 20. They are piling the hay on the stack, which those 6 smiling girls are handing up to them. The guys have taken off their shirts. Perspiration is streaming down their tanned skin, but they are trying to keep up with the merry girls below. There are 2 guys up top, and there ought to be 4 girls throwing up the hay from below, but it turns out there are 6 of them down there laughing and joking, trying to drown the lads in hay. The guy's father comes over to the haystack to get a drink of water. He has quickly sized up the whole situation. His 2 sons are trying to keep up with the 6 girls. They simply cannot afford to get done in. Besides, in the group of nimble, laughing girls below, there may be 2 brides for his sons. After taking a drink, the father calls up to his boys. "Hey there, boys. I don't feel like cutting any more for now. How about I climb up there and help you? Seeing as how there are 6 down below instead of 4. "Why, father?" answered the elder son, not slacking off for a moment. "There are 2 of us up here stacking hay, my brother and I, and we haven't even gotten warmed up yet." "It's as though I'm still asleep," added the younger, as he somehow inconspicuously wiped the perspiration from his brow. Down below, the light-headed girls took notice of his movements. One of them called out over the general laughter, "Watch out, don't let the sleepyhead get wet." The father broke into a smile of contentment before rejoining the rows of scythemen. The train of 4 steeds, which the young men were leading by the bridle, was on its way to the haystack from the farthest meadow. The last horse was led by the youngest, whose name was Radomir. He had turned 8 just before the start of the summer, and was now into his 9th year. But the boy, Radomir, was very well developed for his age. But it was not just his physical height that elevated him above his peers. He had a quicker grasp of knowledge than did the others, and he excelled in festive games. And here at the haymaking he swelled with pride at having been given work usually assigned to the kids just a bit older. He was in no way going to lag behind his elders. He himself was trying to bind up the stooks as quickly as possible, and the horse obeyed him. Even though he brought up the end of the train, he was still not lagging behind. Just a little distance away, the chorus of younger children could be heard in play over by the edge of the forest. As soon as they took notice of the train of horses dragging the stooks, they rushed over to catch a ride on them. The kids rushed headlong to their goal, only one little girl, barely 4 years old, lagging behind. The others had already reached the stooks when she took a mind to try a shortcut and anxiously started running across a swampy stretch of ground. This small swamp had almost dried up, but one could still find patches of elevated ground dotted around. The dear girl jumped from hillock to hillock, very close to the horses dragging the stooks. All at once, however, trying to jump to the next patch of ground, the girl slipped and took quite a fall, scratching her knee badly on a stick and getting her dress and her face all muddied up in the process. She picked herself up, but fell back at once and started screaming at the top of her lungs, smarting with annoyance at her plight, just as the last of the stooks came by and began to recede into the distance. The stately youth Radomir heard the little girl's cries. He brought his steed to a halt and followed the sound of her cries to the swampy ground. Here he found a dear little girl with clothes and hands all muddied, sitting in the midst of a puddle, using her tiny fists to wipe away the tears and bawling with all her might. Radomir took hold of her under her arms, picked her up and out of the puddle, set her down on a dry patch of ground, safe from harm, and asked, "What are you bawling for, little one? Is it that bad?" Still crying, she tried to explain through her tears. "I was running, see? I was jumping from patch to patch, trying to catch up. Only I took a bad fall. All the stooks had gone and I was lagging behind. Now all the other kids are having fun riding on the stooks, and I ended up in this puddle." "They haven't all gone," Radomir responded. "Look, I'm still here, and there's my stook. If you can stop your bawling, I'll give you a ride on it. only you seem to have got so dirty all over. Now stop that screaming once and for all," he demanded. "It's making me deaf." Radomir took hold of the hem of the little girl's dress. Finding a clean patch of dress, he put it up to her nose and commanded, "Come on now, blow your nose." Completely taken aback by this move, the little girl let out a loud "ow" and covered the front of her exposed lower torso with her hands. Now she blew her nose hard. 1, 2, and stopped crying. Radomir let down the hem of her dress and stared with a critical eye at the filthy and disheveled little girl standing before him. "You'd better take your dress off altogether," he said. "Shan't," she declared firmly. "Take it off. I shan't look. I'll rinse out your dirty clothes in the lake. You can sit here in the tall grass while you wait. Here, you'd best take my shirt. It will go right down to your ankles. It'll be longer on you than your dress." Radomir rinsed the little girl's dirty dress in the lake while she wrapped herself in his shirt and peeked at him through the tall grass. As she sat there in the grass, the girl was struck by a piercing, frightening thought. She remembered once overhearing her grandfather telling her grandmother. A terribly scandalous act took place in the next settlement. Some good-for-nothing lifted up the hem of a maiden's dress before marriage. If he lifted up her hem, it means he's crushed the poor dear's life, her grandmother had sighed. The little girl decided that something must be crushed in her too, now that a strange lad had lifted up the hem of her dress. She examined her little arms and legs, and even though they seemed to be in working order, nothing crushed, but her fear did not dissipate. If grandfather and grandmother believed that lifting up a dress hem would crush something, then something of hers must be crushed too. The girl jumped up from the grass and called out to Radomir, who had been rinsing out her dress in the lake. "You're a dirty good-for-nothing." Radomir straightened up, turned toward the girl standing in the grass wearing his shirt, and asked, "What are you carrying on about this time? I don't know what you want." "I'm telling you, you're a dirty good-for-nothing. You dared lift up the hem of a maiden's dress before marriage. You've crushed everything of hers." Radomir looked at the girl's mud-covered face for some time, then burst out laughing. After getting a hold of himself, he said, "Well, you've heard the song, but got it wrong. Sure, lifting up the hem of a maiden's skirt before marriage is a bad thing. But in my case, I didn't lift up the hem of a maiden's skirt." You did. I remember you lifted up the hem of my dress." "Your dress, sure," Radomir agreed. "But then, you're not a maiden, are you?" "How come I'm not a maiden?" the girl asked in surprise. "'Cause all maidens have protruding breasts, and you don't. Instead of breasts, all you have are 2 little spots which are hardly noticeable. That means you're not a maiden." "Then who am I?" the little girl asked distractedly. "You're still a little one. Now you just sit there in the grass and don't say a word. I haven't the time to talk with you." Once again he stepped into the water, finished rinsing out the dress, and then wrung out the water of it and laid it neatly in the grass to dry. Then he called out to the girl, "Come down to the water, little one. You need to get your face washed." She came to him obediently and stood quietly while he washed her face. "Now, let's go to the stook. I'll give you a ride." "Let me have my dress back first," the girl asked, almost in a whisper. "It's still too wet. You can stay in my shirt for the time being. I'll bring your dress along with me. It will have dried out by the time we get to the haystack, and you can change there." "No, give me back my dress," the girl insisted. "Maybe it's wet, but I'm going to put it on anyway. It can dry on me." "Have your own way. Spruce yourself up," said Radomir as he handed her the wet dress and headed over to his horse. The little girl quickly put on her dress. She rushed to catch up to Radomir at the stook. "Here I am," she said, panting away, "and here's your shirt back." "Okay, you're my bad luck charm. All the other lads are heading back already, and here I am stuck with you. Climb aboard." He helped the girl climb onto the stook. He took hold of the bridle and then started off in the direction of the haystack. The little girl sat on the stook in her wet dress, jubilant as it whisked smoothly over the ground. She was riding the Stuk all alone, not in her twos or threes like the other kids. She sat there by herself. Her face was beaming with joy, as though she had suddenly been turned into a goddess. If only her girlfriends could see her now, not as part of a train, but all alone. He was carrying her all by herself. She noticed the way Radomir led the horse by the bridle, and couldn't take her eyes off his back. Her little heart began to beat faster. She naturally felt a sensation of warmth permeate her whole body. Naturally, she was still too young to realize what was going on. She was in love. Oh, for the love of childhood! It is the ultimate of purity, the precious gift of God. Only why does it sometimes make an early start and perturb a little one's heart? Why? What does it mean when it comes early like that? It turns out that there is truly great meaning in early love, something the Vedras people well knew. Upon arriving at the haystack, Radomir came back to the Stuk. "Climb down, little one, don't be afraid, I'll catch you." Catching the little girl in his arms, he set her down on the ground and asked, "Whose kid are you?" "I'm from the next settlement. My name is Liubomila. My sister and I are visiting, helping our brother," she replied. "Go on then, go to your sister," Radomir admonished. Walking away, he did not turn back even once to look at the little girl. She stood there watching everything, how he untied the rope from the Stuk, climbed up to the barrel where he could leap onto his steed. Then he took off at a gallop to fetch a new haystack. Love as a fully fledged member of the family. Little Liubomilka returned home with her sister. It was already the family supper time, but Liubomilka didn't want to sit down to the table. Clinging to her grandmother's skirt, she begged, "Can we go for a walk together in the garden, Grandmakins? I want to tell you about a miracle, just you alone." Upon overhearing the request, the father protested, "It's not proper, daughter dear, to go off when the family is about to sit down to table, let alone take your grandmother with you." But when the father looked into his daughter's face, he broke into a smile. The Vedras people knew the grace of childhood love. They knew how to treat love kindly, to embrace it as a heavenly gift to the family, to refrain from making fun of it and respect its every trace. They valued the grace of its great energy, and so the diverse energies of love would come to them with great joy. "You and your grandmother go for a walk in the garden and eat some berries," said the father, feigning an air of nonchalance. Little Liubomilka sat her grandmother down in a far corner of the garden and right off began excitedly telling her story. "Grandmakins, I was playing with my friends there at the haymaking. They ran off to have a ride on the Stuks. I didn't feel like joining them. I was just minding my own business. All of a sudden, the most kind and handsome young lad stops his horse and comes up to me. Yes, indeed, Grammykins, he just comes as close as you and I are right now. And he was so handsome and kind. Here he stands in front of me and says, 'Little girl, I invite you.' No, he didn't say that. He put it another way. He said, 'Little girl, not only do I invite you, I beg you to take a ride on my Stuk.' And I had a ride. There, you see, Grammykins? Has something happened with him?" Something has happened with you, granddaughter dear. And what might his name be?" "I don't know, he didn't say. First of all, my little Lubomilochka, tell me the whole story and try to remember the way it really happened." "The way it really..." Liubomilka hung her head. "The way it really happened, I took a fall into a puddle. He came along and washed out my dress, and then he gave me a ride on his Stuk. But I guess he never told me his name. He called me Little One, and when he left, he never once looked in my direction." Liubomilka finished her story and began crying. She continued through her tears. "I stayed standing there and watched him go away. only he never looked at me once. And what his name was, he didn't say." The grandmother gave her granddaughter a big hug, stroking her dark blonde hair as though stroking the energy of love within her. And she whispered, as though saying a prayer, "O great energy from God, turn and help my granddaughter with your grace. Do not burn her still immature heart. Give her inspiration to take part in co-creation." Aloud she said to Lubomilka, "Granddaughter dear, would you like this very good lad to always have eyes for you alone?" "Yes, I would, Grammykins, I would." "Then you should not let him come by or see you for 3 years." "But why?" "When he spied you, you were all dirtied by the mud. He saw you as a crying, helpless little girl. That is the impression he still has of you. In 3 years' time, if you yourself make the effort, you will be older, smarter, and more beautiful." "I shall try. I shall try to be the very best I can. Only tell me, Grammykins, how should I try? What plan should I follow?" "I shall share all my secrets with you, granddaughter dear. If you earnestly try to follow them, you will be more beautiful than all the flowers on the earth, and people will rejoice at your presence. You will not need to wait to be chosen. You yourself will have your choice of lovers." "Tell me, Grammykins, and I shall do everything you say. Only tell me faster." Little Lubomilka was trying to hurry her grandmother up, tugging impatiently at the hem of her dress. And slowly, solemnly, uttering the words, the grandmother told Lubomilka, "You need to get up earlier in the morning. You spend your mornings just lazing around. You should get out of bed, run to the stream, and wash yourself with pure water. When you get home, have a little porridge to eat. But you always demand sweet berries instead." "But Grammykins, why should I try doing all this at home if he's not there to see me?" Lubomilka asked in surprise. "He won't see how I bathe in the stream and eat my porridge each morning." "That, of course, is something he won't see. But your efforts will be reflected in your outward beauty, and the energy will be made apparent within." Lubomilka tried to follow her grandmother's advice. She did not always succeed, especially that first year, but on those mornings her grandmother would come to her, sit down on her bed, and say, "If you don't rise with the sun and run down to the stream, you will not become more beautiful this day." And Lubomilka began rising early. By the 2nd year she had become accustomed to the new regimen, and easily went through the routine of washing in the morning and cheerfully eating her porridge at breakfast. Now the 3-year waiting period recommended by her grandmother was almost at an end. Only 1 month remained. People were gathering at the Capiche from all around for this season's fair. Lyubomila and her elder sister Yekaterina watched as carriages regularly passed by their domain on the way to the fair, and all at once they noticed one carriage pull off the road and approach their gate, where the sisters were standing, and lo and behold, there in the carriage, Lubomilka recognized him right off. There, sitting with the other passengers and holding the reins, was none other than her beloved Radomir, looking just a little older. The girl's heart began trembling when the carriage came up to the gate and stopped. An older gentleman among the passengers, probably the father, said, "Cordial greetings, my maidens. Please convey my respects to your father and mother, and all your elders. We would like to drink of your kvass. We forgot to bring our own along on the journey." Lubomilka rushed into the house, calling out, "They send all of you greetings. Where's the pitcher? Our pitcher with the kvass, where is it?" "Oh yes, it's in the pantry, keeping cool." And off to the pantry she dashed, overturning a pail of water standing by the door in the process. Turning around, she rattled off to her grandfather and grandmother. "Not to worry, I'll mop it up when I come back." Grabbing hold of the pitcher, she ran out to the gate, where she stopped to catch her breath. Restraining her excitement, she opened the gate, walked out with stately stride, and handed the pitcher of kvass to the gentleman. While the father of the family was drinking the kvass, Lubomilka kept her eyes fixed on Radomir, but he had eyes for Yekaterina. When his turn came to be handed the pitcher, he drank up the remaining kvass, then jumped down from the carriage and held out the pitcher to Yekaterina, saying, "Thank you, the kvass was prepared by kind hands." Lubomilka watched as the carriage drove off, then running to the deep far corner of the garden, collapsed on the bench and began weeping bitterly. "Why so sad again, Lubomilka?" Grandmother had come over and sat down beside her. Through her tears, the girl told her grandmother what had happened. "They came to us and asked for kvass, and the boy was there who gave me a ride on the stook 3 years ago. He's even more handsome now, and I ran through and brought the kvass in a pitcher. They all took a drink and said how good it was. He took a drink too, and then gave the pitcher to Yekaterina. Not to me, Grammykins, but to her, my rival, Yekaterina. And it was her he thanked, not me. She's a real dingbat, that sister of mine. She must have been chatting him up while I was getting the kvass. He looked back at her and even smiled. My own sister, a rival, a real dingbat. Why are you blaming your sister? She's not at fault. You are." "Why am I to blame, Grammykins? What have I done wrong?" "Listen carefully. Your sister made a colorful embroidery pattern which she neatly applied to the sleeves of her dress. You wanted to do everything yourself too, but on your dress the sewing didn't come out straight. Besides, your sister can speak in verse. She's better than anyone at singing the kolyadki, and you're unwilling to talk with any wise men who can teach you to recite and compose verse. The boy you've chosen, no doubt, he's a pretty smart lad. He has an appreciation of beauty and intellect. Does that mean I have to study another 3 years, Grammykins?" 3, perhaps, but it could be 5. True love will most certainly be reciprocated. 10 years went by. One day, Radomir was walking through one of the regular holiday fairs with his best friend, who had the unusual name of Arga. Arga had a flair for creating marvelous pictures and doing fantastic wood carvings. He could fashion statues of clay that looked as though they were alive. This was a talent he had inherited from his grandfather. From his father was derived his blacksmith's art. The two friends took little interest in the long rows of carts with their vast array of savory offerings. Nor was the young men's attention attracted by the rows of assorted dishes and household utensils. In fact, people did not come to the fair for any material acquisitions at all. The main attraction was talking with others, getting to know them, sharing their experiences with them. The lads decided to head over to the place where they were getting ready for a colorful show by visiting performing artists. Suddenly they heard themselves being hailed. "Radomir, Arga, have you seen it yet?" Radomir and Arga turned around to see who was calling to them. 3 young men from among their community friends were standing a little distance away, engaged in animated conversation and beckoning Radomir and Arga to join them. "Seen what?" asked Radomir as he approached. "That extraordinary shirt," answered one of the 3. "It's made from smooth fabric and embroidered with very unusual ornaments. There's probably some secret meaning in them." A second lad corrected him. "The shirt's really good, but the girl selling it is much prettier. I've never seen a maiden like that at any fair anywhere." "So where do we find this marvel?" asked Arga. The 5 boys headed over to the cart displaying jewelry and ornaments, marvelous handicrafts, and fine clothing. One cart in particular had drawn a bigger crowd than usual. Everybody was admiring an exceptionally beautiful shirt hanging on a wooden hanger. The fabric was rippling lightly in the breeze, and people could see how different it was from the usual shirts made from coarse cloth, exuding, as it did, a feeling of lightness and tenderness. and the patterns embroidered on the collar and sleeves were extraordinarily delicate and fanciful. A pattern like that is the mark of an accomplished craftsman, Arga said aloud in excitement. Never mind the pattern. Squeeze your way through the crowd and see who's sitting beside it, said a neighbor from their settlement. After making their way around to the other edge of the small crowd, the friends managed to approach the cart and catch a glimpse of the maiden. Her eyes were blue as the sky, her dark blonde hair in a tight braid was tied. Her eyebrows were like two brown arches, her lips betrayed just the faintest hint of a smile. Her movements were gracious, but seemed to be entwined with some kind of energy. It was some time before the lads could take their eyes off the maiden. She's clever with her tongue, too, the tallest of them quietly observed. She can speak in verse and comes up with witty sayings, said another added. She's kind of tender, but as aloof and inaccessible as a high cliff. Try talking with her. I can't, answered Radomir. She's taken my breath away. Arga spoke to her first. Tell me, fair maiden, are you the one who crafted this magnificent shirt? I am, the maiden replied without raising her eyes. I wove this shirt to while away the boredom, to make the winter night shorter. Sometimes I would do some embroidery at dawn. And what kind of price are you asking for your handiwork? Arga inquired, so that he could keep hearing the maiden's tuneful voice a little longer. The maiden raised her eyes to look at the young lads, and it seemed as though her gaze was carrying them away to heavenly heights. She let her gaze rest just for a moment on Radomir, thereby dissolving him, as it were, into the blue. From that point on, he felt as though he were in some sort of unusual, unreal dream. What price again? Let me explain. The beautiful girl sitting on the cart went on. I can give this piece without payment only to a kind and courageous young man. I shall ask only something trifling for myself as a souvenir. A colt, for example. What a beauty she is, and such a worthy reply. She's a true master. Loud exclamations could be heard from the crowd. A colt, she says, just a trifle. Yes, a real beauty, all right. No doubt about it. The exclamations went on, but the crowd did not move along. Then, suddenly, the whole throng divided into two halves. There was Arga, leading a dun-colored stallion by a halter rope. The steed was unbroken and hot-tempered, and kept bucking and prancing on the spot. Whispers spread through the crowd. Now that is quite a horse, such a marvelous steed. Could the fine young man have decided indeed to give it away? Arga approached the cart and said, My father gave me this steed. I offer it to you, my beauty, in exchange for the shirt. Thank you, the maiden calmly replied, but I did say, and people heard me say, that the shirt is not for sale. I can only give it away to you, or perhaps to some other young man, fine and true. Aha, the beautiful maiden is frightened. Mocking voices rose from the crowd. Of course the steed is hot-tempered, and too flared up to handle for many a young man. A while ago she was expecting a tame and gentle mare, and now she's got cold feet. See, she's given up the game. So anyone should be careful. It's a downright shame when a steed is unbroken and hot-tempered. The maiden looked out at the crowd with an artful smile and jumped down from the cart with an amazingly lithesome style. At this point, all the exclamations from the crowd ceased at once. The girl's torso was absolutely stunning, as though refined to perfection by a master artist. She stood there before everybody, standing around in all her beauty, smiling at the steed. She took 3 steps in Arga's direction, seemingly floating toward him, barely touching the ground. Completely taken aback, Arga suddenly let go of the halter rope. The hot-tempered stallion reared on its hind legs, but the maiden managed to catch hold of the rope with her hand, and then, to everyone's amazement, Her left hand deftly squeezed the stallion's nostrils. Letting go of the rope, she began caressing the steed's muzzle with her right hand, and the hot-tempered stallion all of a sudden calmed down. She inclined his head toward the ground. At first he put up some resistance, but eventually began bowing to the ground, lower and lower still. And then the steed suddenly fell to its knees before the maiden. A gray-headed oldster stepped forth from the crowd and said, "Only the wise men know how to tame a beast like that, and not even all of them. But you are still a young maiden. What's your name, and whose girl are you?" "I am Lyubomila, from the next settlement. And whose am I? Nobody's. I am simply the daughter of my father. And here he comes, that strict father of mine." "If only I had been strict," said the father, who had just come back to the family cart. "What have you been up to this time, my little gal?" "Nothing much. I've just been playing a bit with this little colt." "A bit? I see. Let the steed go. It's time we got on the road home." Love, too, was teaching in the Vedras school. What had happened to Lyubomila during those years? Where had she learned such wisdom and agility all of a sudden? In the Vedras school. People studied their whole lifetime in this school, from their early childhood to the most advanced age. Every year they sat for exams. The school program had appeared right at the beginning of creation in all its minute detail, and then became further enriched over the centuries. The wisdom was imparted unobtrusively. The lessons were not all like those in your contemporary schools. You once told me, Vladimir, about a certain expression used in your society. When it turned out that a child's mischievous and rude and bad habits show up in him, people would say that he was brought up by the street, that he's been granted too much freedom. The Vedras people had no fear about granting freedom to their children. It was common knowledge that a system of festivals and rites was so intricately and skillfully thought through that all children were absorbed in preparation for them. Even though it seemed as though they were playing, they were actually teaching themselves various disciplines, often without the help of adults. Examinations in the Vedras school were like one festival or celebration after another. With their help, the adults taught the children, and they themselves learnt from the children. Take the festival of the Kolyadki, for example. During the festival days, children walk about and sing Kolyadki to all their neighbors. The verses and melodies, along with the accompanying dance movements, were all composed by the children themselves. Children started preparing for their performances long before the start of the festivals, eager to learn from adults, their families, their peers, and the wise men as to the best ways of mastering verse composition, along with singing and dance movements. Not all children had the same abilities, of course. Those that were not as quick to learn as others would ask their parents to tutor them. And sometimes parents found they could use their children's thirst for knowledge to draw them into helping around the house and grounds. A little boy might badger his grandmother, for example. "Grammykins, dear, read some verse to me. Please do read. I beg you. I don't want to fall behind and be worse than the rest. My friends might not take me with them to sing Kolyadki the next time." And the grandmother would answer, "I've quite a bit to do. Perhaps you could help me, and then I would be able to read you some verse this evening." The child would be eager to help all day long, and afterward would listen intently to his grandmother and try to memorize her verses or songs, and implore her to teach him the appropriate dance moves. Then he might implore his grandfather, and perhaps his mother and father too, to tutor him just a little bit more, and he would be grateful to his parents when they offered him a lesson. Compare this approach, Vladimir, with the lessons children get in school today. In literature, let us say. You are right, there is absolutely no comparison. The Vedras children aspired to become poets themselves right from a very young age. The parade of merry festivals in the Vedras period was a system that helped people learn about the order of the universe and in turn teach their children the simple wisdom of life. The wise men were itinerant teachers and sources of information in regard to what was going on in the world. The Bayans and bards, too, not only reminded people of the events of the past, but gave portents of the future, commending the world of marvelous feelings or reprehending unworthy ones. Such lessons were constantly taking place in every settlement, but nobody would ever compel their children to attend. It was felt that each teacher himself should attract children's attention to the stories of science he was planning to tell. Over the centuries, rules such as these helped perfect the abilities of the wise men teachers. You ask Vladimir whether any wise men teachers, in an effort to attract children's attention, would simply play some sort of game with them instead of actually giving them a lesson in science or the arts. Indeed, if such a thing were to occur, the wise man would be relieved of his wise man's status. In talking with their children at home, parents would perceive right off that the children had not been properly taught. News of his dishonorable conduct would be made known in other settlements, and no matter what community he thought to visit, he would probably be asked to leave. Before the appearance of love within herself, the little girl Lubomilka made no attempt to attend the wise men's lessons or listen to the songs of the bards or the Bayans. The parents would not have forced their children to attend, but might drop a surreptitious hint at an appropriate occasion. It was love that enfolded little Lubomilka in its energy. In Vedra's families, the appearance of love was greeted as a new member of the family sent by God to help them, and they knew how they could, in harmony with love, make the little girl's life marvelous. This was why the grandmother advised Lubomilka to go and study with the wise men, not just to study for the sake of studying, but with a specific purpose, to become the very best she could for the one she loved. Lubomilka consented and decided that the next time a wise man presented himself who could teach people to sing songs with a beautiful voice, she would indeed go to see him along with her friends. But the wise men they needed never came. Lubomilka decided she would simply go listen to the next wise man that showed up. She did, and began to listen to his lecture. This wise man began talking about the specific function of various plants, the fragrances these gave off, and about how plants could be used to treat man's diseases. "What do I need this for?" Lubomilka thought to herself. "Indeed, this is neither here nor there. Everyone knows how to treat. Mama, grandmother, sister, they all know. And even if I should learn more than anyone else about the various herbs, how will that be noticed by my intended? He'll never notice it." So Lubomilka listened to the wise men without paying too much attention. She sat there on the log simply for her girlfriend's company, and sometimes she would get up, walk out, and wander about the little glade. She was glad when the wise man ended his lecture and everyone made ready to go home. Then all of a sudden the elderly wise man turned to Lubomilka. "Tell me, little girl, you did not find my presentation interesting?" "It's just that it's really of no use to me. It does not fit in with my secret aspiration," little Lubomilka informed the wise man almost in a whisper. The wise man teacher broke into a faint smile. The perspicacious old fellow knew about the little girl's secret aspirations and remarked, "You know, little girl, you may be right. I can allow that this knowledge has nothing to do with you right now. After all, you're still pretty young. But for older girls, I explain how they can become beautiful and create a space of love for the one they love. When he sees this space of love, he will definitely want to know who has been able to co-create such beauty, and he will be so excited to meet whoever steps forward as its creator. I shall also reveal to the maiden the secrets of how to weave a garland, how to prepare a tea of herbs for their beloved, and what to use in washing in the morning to make their bodies smell flower sweet. I shall be further explaining." Little Lubomilka listened to the elderly fellow and began to regret more and more that she had not gone to his classes. He stayed in the settlement for more than a week. He revealed to the maidens important secrets which she knew nothing about. And Lubomilka asked the wise men, "Are you going to be staying much longer in our settlement?" "I shall be on my way in a couple of days," he responded. "In a couple of days?" The girl could not hide her disappointment. In 2 days, then I would kindly beg of you to spend your last 2 nights with us." "I have already accepted invitations to other homes," responded the wise man. "But if it means so much to you—" "Yes, I very, very much need to learn from you about all the different herbs." Each evening the wise man spent his whole time talking with the love-smitten Lubomilka. He knew that the inspiration of love would help this little girl grasp the essence of the subject in a day or so, while even a year might not be enough for some others. When it was time for him to leave, Lubomilka escorted the wise man to the outskirts of the settlement, and he told her, "After me, another wise man will be coming here. He will be talking about the stars and the moon in the skies, about the sun, and about worlds invisible to our eyes. Whoever succeeds in understanding him will be able to light a guiding star in the skies for her beloved, and that star will shine for them both forever. Then along will come a wise man who knows how to tame wild beasts. Indeed, how to render even the most headstrong steed obedient to your beloved and faithful friend to him. A bard, too, should be coming to you. He knows how to write verse and come out with such songs that many people will fall in love first with the voice, then after that everything expressed in the song. And he can also teach dance. Tell me, please, which wise man should I not bother going to hear?" Lubomilka suddenly said to the old fellow. "After all, I can't spend all my time listening to wise men." Once more the old fellow, cleverly concealing a smile, answered the girl in all seriousness. "Yes, you are right. If you go hear all of them day after day, then there simply will not be enough time for play. You do not need to go and hear every single one. Why, for example, would you want to learn how to draw, or embroider clothes with ornaments and imbue them with meanings that only your heart knows? Why would you need this kind of teaching? If you have an older sister, and she, I believe, will turn out to be an unsurpassed master thereof. And why would you, for example, go and learn how to instill feelings of kindness in a shirt you sew, a shirt that will protect its wearer from many ills? Or learn how to make fresh porridge with love for your dear ones, which will satisfy not only their flesh but their soul as well. The taste of that porridge will be unsurpassed. But that is something that can be done to perfection by your sister's friend who lives next door. And when you want to obtain a beautiful dress or shirt to present to someone as a special gift, a gift that will arouse everyone's elation, you can always ask your sister, and she will come up with a marvelous creation. And if, in the end, you want to treat someone to an extraordinary dish of porridge or kvass, you can always ask your sister's friend." "I shan't ask anybody," Lubomilka suddenly blurted out, even stamping her foot, quite forgetting herself. "Those are my rivals." "Rivals? In what way?" the old fellow asked in all seriousness. And Lubomilka did not blush, but responded, "There's this boy, he's the best of the bunch, only he doesn't pay any attention to me, 'cause these dingbats managed to grow up ahead of me. They kept smiling at him all the time. I saw it when they danced the khorovod at the capiche, and I'm supposed to present him with a shirt my sister made and kvass prepared by her girlfriend? No way, never." "But why should it not be that way? You say he is the best of all the lads." "He is the best. That I know for sure." "Then answer me, why should not the best lad receive the very best shirt as a gift, and the best porridge, and kvass besides, and—" The old wise man paused, and very quietly, almost to himself, he added, "I think it is only just for him to have the very best bride of all." "Bride?" Lubomilka's cheeks flushed. "Yes, bride," replied the wise man. "Indeed, should you not wish him only good? Let him have the best bride of all." Lubomila looked at the wise man, not able to utter a word. She was filled with feelings which set her on fire, and suddenly she began running off. But after a short distance she stopped and turned around and cried out to the wise man, "I agree. He does deserve to have the best bride of all, and that bride will be me." Lubomilka eagerly paid a visit to every wise man that came to the settlement thereafter. She was always the first to arrive and the last to leave, and the wise men could hardly believe the surprising questions she asked. She memorized in her head everything the men of wisdom said. In a learning situation, this is possible only when a child is not simply attends the classes, but actually comprehends where he will apply the knowledge received. When instruction proves too grueling for the pupil, it can be counterproductive. When a man has a specific goal that can be mastered through the study of various disciplines, learning for him becomes an exhilaration, and the assimilation of knowledge proceeds 100 times faster. And when love enters into the equation, the resulting effect is unsurpassed. Love is capable of scanning the thought of any wise man. Just a few words spoken by the teacher can be sufficient not only to explain the whole subject to the pupil in the blinking of an eye, but even beyond that, to further engage his thinking. Love, a great energy, the gift of God, was paramount in Lubomilka's instruction. Back at home, the little girl followed her mamma and grandmother's dinner preparations with great eagerness. She had them explain all their actions in full detail, and tried her own hand at creating various dishes, and the little one came up with some rather unusual creations. Once, at Maslenitsa, a group of relatives had come to join in a meal. 2 stacks of pancakes stood on the table, one of them cooked by the girl's mother and grandmother, and the other by little Lubomilka herself. The guests found her pancakes much tastier than the others, and this now not so little girl watched from a far corner of the room as her stack of pancakes began disappearing faster than the other. When the whole family sat down to the table on a weekday, grandfather would be the first to taste the cabbage soup from a wooden spoon, and he would say, "I know for certain who made this soup. It has a pleasant and tender taste that no one else can match." "Hear, hear," the girl's father added. "Not only does it contain flowers from unusual herbs, but there is feeling in it." Little Lubomilka found learning the disciplines no chore at all. In her life she became a craftsman without peer. She herself blossomed into an extraordinarily beautiful woman. From the first wise men she had learned without realizing it the truth of great love. If you wish to be close to God, become a goddess yourself.